Es sind Zwein Weg in dieser Zeit, der eine schmal, der andere weit, wer jetzt
We call them the Amish. Shunning modern advancements, they drive horses and buggies and live without electricity. Where do they come from? Are they a culture? A religion? What made them who they are? This film series explores the inner workings of the Amish Church, as told by some of their own, who no longer wear black hats and bonnets. For 300 years, the Amish have been known as the silent in the land, but now a growing number of them are breaking the silence.
I love being Amish. I love the old-fashioned ways. I would have wanted to be more old-fashioned than most of the Amish were.
For several hundred years, the Graber family has been Amish. My parents, Lester and Rebecca Graber, had 7 children. I'm the second child. That's me right there.
And we were taught that for us, the most important thing we could ever be was to stay Amish. We were born that way. If God meant you to be anything else, you'd have been born something else.
In episode 1, we experienced an old order Amish church service and a normal Sunday at the Borntrager farm. In this episode, we will hear my family's story, and we'll find the answer to the question, what happens when an old order Amish man starts studying the Bible?
When my grandpa was Amish, he preached in the Amish church.
As a boy, I felt important because my dad was an Amish minister, and I would sit with him on the front bench. I loved hearing him preach. We kept all the rules and were good examples of what it means to be Amish.
I was born in the Amish community of Middlebury, Indiana. I remember the first time I drove a horse down the road in a buggy. I was going to my aunt's place, a mile down the road, and they had told me, if you meet a car, you have to turn to the right. Well, there comes this car. And I'm pulling on that horse, trying to get him to run on the left side of the road. And he didn't want to. And I'm just all over the road. This car is like behind me, and it's like, And I thought, oh, maybe I'm doing the wrong things. I was on the other, and the horse just immediately got over there.
Coming home after dark, in the buggy, everybody together, and Dad singing up front, and the buggy wheels rattling on the gravel and then on the blacktop, and the horse's hoofs going clip-clop, clip-clop. I love that sound. When my dad had the reins and everybody was on the buggy, all was right with the world. We milked the cows at a certain time, summer, winter, crushed in heads. As soon as we were done, we would eat supper, and then in the summer, we would all together go out and hoe the garden. Everybody would grab a hoe, or some people would pull weeds. And then in the winter, we had story time. My dad was a storyteller. And after supper, when the dishes were washed, he would get a book. We couldn't understand English, so he would translate the book in German for us. And the most coveted spot was on his lap, but once you got pushed off by a younger sibling, you would hang on the shoulder here or there, or you would be as close as you could to Dad, to see the book and to hear him and feel his whiskers tickling you. And
those old Amish threshing rings we had, that was about the most fun. I was intrigued by the machinery part of it. Somebody had to crank that thing and make that blower come up from out of the machine and swing back around to where you wanted it, and then you had to do the chute off the side that goes down into the box wagon, and I'd be out with the boys, and I'd drive the horses on the wagon. They were the ones who'd be out in the fields loading. Every summer, we'd look forward to that. Then at the end of it, when it was all done, we'd get together one night and we'd have ice cream. Big old ice cream dinner and cakes and more food than you could eat, and it was just a great time for a kid, growing up.
My parents enjoyed their childhood, but they both experienced some of the deepest grief a young child can have.
then when I was 10 years old, my mother got real sick that summer. And I just remember all 10 of us children in a line there, and my mother said, "This is Amish. We don't hug." She just shook each one of our hand and walked out the door. And my dad went with her. They took her to the hospital. Then one day my dad came home from the hospital and he told us all to come in the living room, and we all got around him and he told us, Mother has died and she's not going to be here anymore.
Up to this point, I was the oldest child. I was the only child. 1968, my sister was born. A year and a few days after that, my mother died from cancer. Dad woke me up early that morning and said, well, Mom died.
When somebody dies, you always wear black for the longest time, for 7 Sundays. And after that, I just felt kind of good when I wore black. I thought I was remembering my mother.
From the outside, the Amish all look very similar. But the truth is, each church in each community has slightly different rules. And the leadership in each community has different philosophies on how to enforce the rules. As a result, a lot of conflicts arise. The conflicts are usually centered around appearances and who's in control. If you don't like who's in control, or you don't like the rules, your only option really is to move to another community.
I began to understand why my dad always moved. We moved to Branson, Michigan. That's where I started teaching school.
My father was born in Middlebury, Indiana. When he was 6 years old, he moved to Clark, Missouri. And then after he graduated from school, they moved to Branson, Michigan.
They moved just a mile down the road from us.
The first Sunday we were in church, way across the other side of the room, there was a row of girls over there, and I looked at them, and I'm 15 years old, and I'm just, feeling my notes a little bit, and I'm like, wow, look at all those girls. And there's only one of them that really impressed me.
One evening, my dad came home and we ate supper. He said, as I was coming home this afternoon, I saw this huge field of bundles of wheat on the ground. In the middle of that field, there was one lonely boy shocking wheat all by himself. Who wants to go with me to help that poor guy? So we all piled in the buggy and went down there. That was one of the first times I really met Lester. One evening at a singing, we girls were down in the kitchen and the boys were upstairs. And we heard them carrying on up there and bumping and giggling and laughing.
We'd talk about the girls and see who was taking who home. And
they were daring each other, said, why don't we ask her for a date? So William said, okay, you go first. You ask her tonight. The next Sunday, I'll ask her.
So on a dare, one Sunday night, I said, okay, let's do it. And she said yes. I couldn't believe it.
And he thought that I was this popular girl that was so used to having boys.
I'm sure they were lined up. They were lined up. And there was 2 or 3 events that happened right during our first date that night that I knew this girl cares for me, and I care for her, and I really believe we're supposed to be together.
He took me home that night, and he came in and we visited. We sat on the couch. I went to get him a drink of water. He had his feet out, and I stumbled over him, and I dumped water in his shoe. But he didn't say anything. I said, did you get wet? And he said, no, it's okay. And he drank the water, and we went out. His lantern had blown out. So I took it to light it for him, and I put it on backwards. With the reflector in front instead of the back. And when he saw that, he thought, she's more shook up than she's pretending to be.
That was how it started.
Yeah, I had always prayed that God would show me who was the right one. And when I came back in the house, as soon as I got inside the door, it was like the presence of God came on me, and I felt it, and I knew that this was the man that I was supposed to marry. Now, William was going to have the next turn, next Sunday.
And I went back and I said, you're not getting a turn, man. It's over.
So he asked me again, and I said yes.
There was just confirmation after confirmation that I knew that this was the right one, because I was quite young yet, man. I don't know, 17 maybe. It was wintertime, snow, but I saw her every Sunday.
So after my parents met in Branson, Michigan, and began courting, then the Grabers moved to Shipshewana, Indiana, and then my mother's family moved down to Tennessee.
For a whole year, we didn't see each other. We just wrote letters.
They wrote the day-to-day news to each other in English, but then they would switch to German cursive to write to each other in secret. On a beautiful August day in 1977, several hundred of their family and friends gathered together and witnessed their marriage. In the afternoon, they ate watermelon from Grandpa's mid-Tennessee watermelon patch. Thus began life as a young Amish married couple.
So after we got married there in Huntington, Tennessee, then my parents decided to move to Arkansas. And we moved over there, and my dad helped us find a place, and we actually lived in Beebe, Arkansas. And that's where Ruth was born.
I'm the oldest of 7 children. My parents are Lester and Rebecca. I was born into an Amish family in Beebe, Arkansas. My brother Joseph was born there as well.
But before I was born, something else happened that was to change the course of my family. That fall, as the time for communion rolled around, the Amish church there decided to have an ordination service because they needed more ministers. Now, in the Amish, the ministry is not desired or chosen based on calling or skills. Rather, the congregation chooses a small handful of men, and then lots are drawn.
If the lot falls on you, you are a preacher for the rest of your life. And it is God ordained, and so you don't argue, you just accept it. Then they sit there holding these books, and then the bishop comes along and he opens the first one, and then he goes to, there's a certain page in the book at the Loblied where they have this slip of paper that has this Bible verse in it and this little saying in German. So they opened my dad's book. It wasn't there. They gave back his book. They opened Dave Miller's book. It wasn't there. They gave it back to him. They opened Harley's book. It wasn't there. They gave it back. And then they opened Lester's book, and there it was. The bishop read it, and then he shook Lester's hand and welcomed him into the ministry.
After I was ordained a minister in Arkansas, I had a real desire to really get into the Word.
Lester started reading the Bible like he never had before and getting ready to teach it.
We still believe the church that we were familiar with, the Amish Church, could be a biblical church, and it would be a biblical church, and it should be a biblical church, and that everything we do should be based on the biblical patterns. In my first year, there was an issue that had come up in the community, and I asked the bishop about it. And this was my uncle, Yuri. And he says, I know, but don't rock the boat. We can't do everything at once. We can't do those things. That was kind of disappointing to me because I thought, if it's biblical, everybody would want to get on board. But they didn't want to. Those tradition is a very strong horse. It will carry a long way.
In the early 80s, my family moved to Smiley, Texas to work on a chicken farm and to be part of a small Amish community that was just starting here. When I was about 1.5 years old, my little brother Timothy was born. A week later, he died. Having a child in heaven caused my parents to have a greater awareness of heaven and of God and of things eternal. The shared grief of both of my parents losing their mothers in their childhood, reawakened by this fresh grief, gave my parents a longing for heaven and questions about how to get there. With this perspective, they looked over the widely varying churches within the Amish community and tried to understand what was the best way to be righteous and holy. How could you really live a life that was pleasing to God? In one community, modern things like bicycles were permitted. In another community, they were told that owning something like a bicycle was enough to send you to hell.
If I had lived in one community all of my life, you'd have accepted that and never thought much of it. But we did move around. We did ask questions. Why can you have one set of Amish over here and they're so liberal, and another set over here and they're so conservative? Trying to work through all of those things and not understanding exactly where they fit and how they fit, I became conservative and decided that, if I'm going to be Amish, I'm going to be the best Amish there is. We're going to be conservative. We're going to be the real Amish.
We wanted to obey the rules.
We're going to be what it really means to be Amish. As years go on, it leads to emptiness. It gave you purpose when you were young, but it kind of leads to nowhere.
Then we moved to Michigan. My sister Rachel was born there.
Each of these moves were outward indications of the inward condition of my parents' lives. With each new community came the hope of a better opportunity to serve God. And with each new community came its own challenges. In Michigan, the challenge happened to be my great-uncle Ora Graber, who was a minister in the Amish Church.
It soon became very evident that Uncle Ora expected Lester just to walk right behind him and yay, whatever he said, yay, and not have a conscience of his own.
He said, you preach the wrong things. These people do not need to hear grace. They need to hear fear. And whenever you heard him preach, he preached fear. And his philosophy was that if you scare these people enough, they'll fear God and stay out of hell.
Great-uncle Ora wasn't the only one to disagree with my father in Michigan. One of the elders of the church was getting quite frustrated with this young preacher who kept trying to apply the Bible to Amish church rules.
And he called me a young whippersnapper who thinks I'm smarter than the rest. No, I mean, I wasn't trying to be smart. I was trying to say, look, there has got to be a biblical response to this. You have this issue, and you have a biblical solution, but you can't accept that because we also have historical precedent. That really started to bother me.
After Michigan, we moved to Tennessee, and my brother Jonathan was born in a log cabin that my parents built there. Tennessee, I think, was one of my favorite places to live.
Tennessee was probably the last place that we were really still Amish at heart. We had no intention of leaving. You know, we're Amish. We were raised this way, and we're going to stay this way.
The first people to move into an Amish community are the ones who get to set the rules and the written standard the way they want them.
We weren't the first ones to move into the community. And in this case, you know, there was a buggy shop and there was a harness shop, and they had some tools. You know, the buggy shop had a diesel power Lincoln Arc welder, you know, that they would use, and several other things like that. And that they said, well, you know, we need that, and that's what we agreed at the beginning. But when I asked about certain things that I wanted to do for my business, they said, well, you weren't here when it started, and we can't change it now, and they refused to change it. I bought a Woodmiser sawmill. The motion control that travels in the carriage forward and back is powered by a 12-volt electric motor. And they said, we can't have that. I said, well, you have a welder. Yeah, but we were here when the community started, you weren't. So I actually replaced that, took all the 12-volt electrics off of that sawmill, replaced it with a hydrostatic drive out of an old lawnmower, and used a Briggs-Stratton engine running independently of the other engine that actually, you know, cut the lumber. And this one engine with the hydrostatic drive moved the carriage back and forth, you know. So we went to a lot of trouble to live simple.
It's essential and hydro and the saying
Now, sometimes in our preaching, we would say things that we'd heard from others, and I was challenged on a point one day, and I really couldn't answer it there in Tennessee because I didn't know the point behind it. And I realized, man, you know, I need to learn more and study more. There was, in Rebecca and my life, a constant growing of spiritual awareness. We finally left Tennessee because it was just that there were things that were just, they couldn't be resolved that we believe was a spiritual resolution to it.
And then we moved to Missouri for a short time to be close to my grandparents who were working on a chicken farm.
At this point, I had decided that I would take the standard. We had a written standard, Ordnungsbrief, that I was going to take it, rewrite it, make it biblical, make it perfectly Amish, but perfectly biblical so that everything was substantiated by the Bible. And I actually tried. I started working on it, but I didn't get very far. I could never finish it because it couldn't be done.
We had not been in Missouri very long before all the other Amish families began moving out, and eventually we were the last family left. But another group, the Beachy Amish, had started moving in. Now, the Beachy Amish have a plain dress code, but they're allowed to have electricity in their homes, and they are allowed to have cars as long as the cars are painted black.
The Sundays that we didn't have church, they would invite us over to their services.
I remember Dad was wanting to go, you know, he would take us sometimes to the Beachy Amish Church, or Dad and Joseph and Rachel would go, and I would stay home with Mom. And because Mom was sick at that time, because she was pregnant with Rosemary, and so she was home in bed a lot, and then Dad would go, and he was really excited about it.
The Beachy Amish, I think, helped me to become more aware of spiritual things.
Their church services were in English.
They made it easier much easier to understand than just the old German. I told Rebecca, I said, let's just join them.
I said, let's stop and look at this. The only difference between them and the Amish where we come from is their fences are just farther out. They have rules too. They are in the same legalism that we are. I mean, if we would go with them, we would just be going for the modern stuff mainly.
I'd have left. She didn't want to. She said, no, it's not time yet. We can't do this. There's no difference between us and them. And she was right.
And then after that, we moved to Montana, where my two youngest sisters were born, Rosemary and Dorcas. My grandfather was very concerned about where my parents were going. He was just talking about how, we have bicycles, and next we'll have cars.
Grandpa had reasons to be concerned. The community we were moving to in Montana was not as conservative as other communities we'd been in. They had bicycles and tractors. They used propane, and they built beautiful log cabins that would have been considered too prideful in most of the communities we'd been in. They also had an element of New Order Amish people in the community. And several years earlier, a number of people had actually left the Amish from the community there.
And I remember them moving in and your dad coming off with this big old hat. I mean, he had a huge hat, which was a sign that he's more righteous or more conservative. And so that's the picture I got right away. It's like, oh, who's this guy, What's he gonna do to us? But as time went on, we became friends.
In the Montana community, there were a bunch of single guys that lived on what we call the Bachelor Hill.
And they had escaped to Montana. There they could live unhindered. They could work. They could hunt, fish.
We were on our way down to see Homer Miller. Homer was a bachelor on Bachelor Hill while we were at Montana.
And I just kind of did my thing, just lived as a hermit. Being Amish, I really liked it. I train horses now, and it sure helped me.
I work with a lot of them at the mill, got to know them. They come to the shop.
I really like your dad. He always makes sure he did more than his share. He a little hyper every now and then.
We would invite him in for supper, and they would eat with us, and they would tell us more of their stories.
If in the evening one of the guys would go out and shoot his gun, pretty soon the next guy would shoot his gun, and pretty soon they'd have a whole chorus going back there.
Bang, 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 bang. It was just a whole big circle.
In the evening, when it was time for bed, I would climb up the ladder into my loft, and Dad would be sitting down, reading the scriptures, poring over them. In the morning when I awoke, Dad would already be up, and he would have the Bible on the desk again.
During this time, this last year that we were still Amish, a group of people, a group of families got together on Saturday nights, and we had our Saturday night prayer meeting. And that was really a wonderful time because it really helped us, encourage us, and strengthen us.
I definitely saw a change in my dad. He and my mom would be getting along better, or their relationship was better, and just that he was excited about living life.
My dad had a good relationship with many of the bachelors. However, some of the other men in the church wanted Dad to enforce the rules because a lot of the bachelors had things they weren't supposed to have in the Amish church, like a guitar or a camera or a radio. But my dad was more concerned with their inner struggle than with their outward conformity.
This one week, one of the guys came and told Lester that he's been really being convicted of something that he did that was against the Amish rules.
So the following Sunday after the service, my dad asked the members to stay seated for a members' meeting.
And I announced that there were several boys that wanted to make their things right. Then I just mentioned that if there were anybody else who wanted to make their things, but if you got things you want to confess that you feel you need to confess, that'd be a good time.
And so when he told these three boys to go, over a dozen of them got up and went outside.
In the Amish church, the offending member first confesses in detail to a minister.
And then they took turns saying what it was that they wanted to confess.
The members are informed of the nature of the infraction, and a vote is taken to see whether any punishment will be given. In this case, they just voted on whether to restore the young men to good standing with the church.
And so they went through, and everybody was enig med the förslag. Everybody was agreed with it.
At this point, the offending member makes a general confession on bended knee in front of the congregation.
I confessed that I failed and I sinned, and with the Lord's help, I want to do better.
In the dialect, we call this rosaha maha, or making their things, meaning making their things right with God and the church.
It was like a revival meeting in the Amish.
Within a week, I heard from the bishop, "You don't have the authority to do this, to take sins out of people." I said, "I did not take their sins out. They confessed them before God. I let them do it." And that was one of the counts that was against me.
And then when they found out that we were just meeting in houses and reading the Bible in English and praying in English, they said, "This is enough."
Your mom and dad had started going to some of the prayer meetings, and we kind of saw in the direction they were going. So we thought, well, why don't we try to become closer friends with them so that we can keep them here, because we need them here. Your dad was already starting to preach a little bit different than when he first came. It was like there was new life there.
The elders of the church saw that we were close friends. They thought they needed to silence Lester because he was going to this non-Amish prayer meeting. So they came to our house saying, "What do you guys think if we were to silence him?" So I asked the guys there, "So what's your relationship like with the Lord?" And they didn't know what to make of it. They left thinking, "Oh, this guy's nuts. He's one of the ungehorsen, which means disobedient people."
I remember one Saturday, I was sitting at the quilt, and I think Ruth was helping me, and some of the children were there, and all at once, "Somebody's coming." And here comes these black hats bobbing up there, a whole bunch of them. They came in and they sat around in a circle there, all very solemn, and they talked to Lester and about the error of his ways and that he better consider things.
The thing I really appreciate about my parents is that they kept all the rules of the Amish Church and everything, making sure that they were doing everything right except believing that Jesus is the only way to heaven.
That's one thing we always talked about. We do not want to be put out of the Amish Church because of material things. I don't want anybody to say, she had a tape player, or she had a camera, or she had a radio, that's why we put them out, or she wore the wrong kinds of dresses. I said, let's not do that. Let's make them put us out because of Jesus.
Everything just happened with us having Bible studies and prayer meetings with our neighbors.
The bishop was back in Indiana, and he would call in and tell one of the members of the church, "You have to go talk to him." And the one man especially that he told somebody later, he said, "I couldn't go talk to Lester. I couldn't go tell him he was doing anything wrong. He always smiled at me and was so friendly. I couldn't tell him he was wrong."
I remember when our neighbor lady came over to talk to Mom one evening, and she just was so nervous. I was just like, I don't know what she's talking about, because it seemed like something is going on. But I didn't realize at the time she was actually talking to Mom about us leaving the Amish.
When we first came to Montana, I was, of course, the lead minister because I was the only minister. But it was towards the last year we were there. Another minister had moved in, and by Amish tradition, I was ahead of him because I had been ordained longer. The bishops had requested that I let him lead out, and I stepped back. And I knew what they were after. And he was caught between me and the bishops. As time went on that summer, that the bishops had requested that he take counsel with the church and silence me, and put us out of church. So he called this members meeting after church this Sunday, and he gets up and he starts to say something, but he can't say it.
He opened his mouth and he tried to say something, and it just wouldn't come out.
He finally starts crying. And he just stuttered and he couldn't say anything. And finally, he just dismissed church, said, I'm supposed to do something, but I can't do it. 2 weeks later, he calls members meeting again. I think he has more encouragement. And this time he actually gets to it and says, "Well, Lester and Rebecca, they need to give the church room, go out because we're going to vote about them."
You know, the person to be voted about leaves the room. Then they go around voting with everybody. And so when they came to us, we said, "No, we're just going to go outside with Lester and Rebecca." So we left the room.
And he actually votes, but he gets a vote very strong in our favor.
That day didn't work because we had friends, Lester had friends.
The bachelors lined up kind of behind Lester and us.
They knew we weren't just being wild or worldly, so they couldn't get an agreement.
They never could get And anyhow wrote to put us out because of all the bachelors that would oppose it.
And we were now coming into the fall of 1993. So finally, Guillermo just came out on his own. He took me aside one day and said, look, I'm going to ask you a question, then I want an answer from you. And I want you to answer me in church Sunday, not now. Do you support the standard that we have here, or don't you? I said, well, I don't really have an issue with the standard for the most part. That's not the problem we're facing here. We have spiritual problems that are a whole lot bigger than the standard. But there are things that clearly aren't biblical. And I upset him. He yelled, I don't care what the Bible says. We do it the way we've always done it. He said, you know what? We've been going through this all summer. I don't need a vote from this church. I can take care of this myself. As of today, you're silenced. You can no longer preach in an Amish church.
They had convinced everyone that we were not obedient to the church, and that was ground enough to silence both of us. Mm. So us and Lester's together got the silence thing.
One of my uncles took me on a long walk on the mountainside. He tried in multiple ways to get me to go home and live with one of their families. But I was on to him. And I wasn't about to leave my family. Things were just getting exciting.
My aunt and uncles, and they all came. And I just remember I was outside hanging up laundry, and they came out and talked to me by myself, asking if I wanted to come live with them. But I said, no, I don't. And I was happy about it, and I didn't even feel bad for saying no.
They sat down with my dad and tried to convince him that he was wrong. You say you know you're saved. You can't know that. How can you know you're saved? And then my dad's answer. Jesus said, my sheep know my voice. They were so nervous, but my dad was so calm. Over and over again they tried. They finally concluded by saying that Dad's confidence was just pride, and Revelation clearly says that all the proud go to hell. So the fact that my dad thought he was saved proved that he was going to hell.
We had fought the battle for 14 years. It was time to leave. It was time to go.
I didn't want to leave the Amish because I loved the way we worked together as families. I loved the way the people got together for threshings and haymaking and ice cream suppers and frolics and barn raisings and all those things.
I don't know that I ever had that one defining moment, oh, we're going to leave the Amish, but it was more like, oh, we're following the Lord and this is exciting.
I thought they were moving too slow. I wanted to go out and buy clothes and just everything right now, change, just go.
I wanted to be a special aunt to all my nieces and nephews. I wanted to be there so my children would know their uncles and aunts and their grandparents.
One of her sisters wrote her a letter saying that she hopes that her children never find out that they have an Aunt Rebecca, and that if anybody in the family dies, she hopes my mom never finds out. It was really hard for my mom, but she knew that what she was doing was right.
I mean, it came down to the wire. Following Jesus, leaving all that behind, being willing to leave it behind. I was having a real hard time with this because I knew if we left the Amish, that would be the end of our relationship. We couldn't go back to family reunions, no weddings.
When the struggle would come too strong, Mom would walk up the mountainside to be alone in prayer.
I said, Lord, even Jesus didn't have to go through this. He was always with you and he knew he had your approval. And I'm going to have to lose my father's approval if I do this.
Other Christian families in the valley would sometimes invite us over in the evenings for special services with traveling missionaries and evangelists. On the day of Mom's desperate prayer, we received word that there would be a meeting that evening.
And that night, Ray Wingard preached a sermon on why Jesus suffered on the cross. And he told us that it wasn't the physical part that hurt Jesus the most. The worst part for Jesus was the rejection he felt from his father, because his father had to turn his back on him so he could die. Our sin on him separated him from his father. It was as if the Lord was speaking directly to me, answering my question that I had asked on the mountain. And it was just like that, one thing after another, that I would just cry out to God, and he would either show me in the Bible, show me a verse, or else the preacher would preach about it, or I'd open a book and the answer would be there, or some way I always got an answer.
When my parents were agonizing through leaving the Amish and what that would mean to our family, our relationships with their parents, with their brothers and sisters,
Lester and I, we found that verse in the Bible.
There is no one who has left house or brothers or sisters,
father or mother or houses or barns
or wife or children or lands, for my sake in the Gospels, who shall not receive 100-fold now in this time.
And in this time, not in the future, not in heaven. It said, the Bible said, in this time.
And in the age to come, eternal life.
And so we thought, that is really a verse we can stand on, and it turned out right.
As our Amish relatives shunned us, the Lord provided us family, Christian family.
The brothers and sisters in the church, they were there for us.
Dad would read this verse a lot. He would walk around the house and he would say it a lot. And I think that was very comforting to me. My cousins were no longer allowed to write to me. We used to have a cousin circle letter that we would write in, and they didn't write to us anymore at all. And I remember the first time I saw my cousin that is closest to my age after we left the Amish. My mom and I wanted to go talk to her, but she would just look the other way and she wouldn't say a word to us. And that was a little hard, just that because we'd grown up together.
But the thing that I've come to really appreciate as I get older, and just recently I really realized how much my parents did for me as we were leaving the Amish, because that's very traumatic. But it wasn't traumatic for us kids. I mean, Mom and Dad really made it so safe and full of love, and it wasn't traumatic.
I still feel like I come from a different culture a lot of times, and that most of the time people don't understand that.
Just feeling different, and just feeling like I don't fit in. You know, everybody sees me sticking out like a sore thumb, and I know they didn't.
I just remember the first day we spent all day with non-Amish speaking people, and I felt like I'd been chewing gum all day because my jaws were so sore from speaking English.
But it was an adventure. Okay. Making new friends, getting to wear different clothes, and getting to do things. We've watched our first movie. We hooked it up to a generator and watched Anna and Gables with that motor going the whole time, but it was so awesome. I remember buying our first car. That was amazing.
I liked horses, and I got motion sick when I got in a car or vehicle of any kind, and I had to throw up when I got in a car. When Lester said he was going to go get a Suburban, I went into my bedroom. I sat on that chair and I said, Lord, I said, if it is right that we drive vehicles, if it is not a sin, then show it to me by helping me never be motion sick again. You know what? I got in the car when he came home. I never was car sick after that. I could sew. I could do anything while driving. I was not car sick. So God said the cars were all right. We were facing this. How are we going to dress now that we no longer had to dress Amish? And it was kind of hard at first to start cutting the boys' hair different. And then my husband started losing his beard. And you know, when you do that, echoes of sermons. I sat under so many sermons they would preach about this man less the Amish, and then when I saw him, he had cut some of his beard off. Next time, his beard was more gone. And then pretty soon, he didn't have a beard at all, and there was nothing Amish about him anymore, and he was totally out in the world. He was serving the devil, and that's just the way it goes. If you take off a little of the beard, more and more will get off. And so, you know, you would hear these things. It was, I guess, like flashbacks from soldiers in war. You would get flashbacks every once in a while. You have to deal with them and say, okay, Lord, that was not your voice that I just heard. So we had to resist the devil. I would pray about things and ask God, what do you want me to do about this? How shall we dress? And we started learning how modesty and things like that, it is taught in the Bible. And so we started seeing principles in the Bible that we could stand on and tie to.
You can't read the Bible too much, no matter what language it is. It's not going to hurt you.
One time my sister was calling me. She was saying, the rules are for our fences. How do we keep the sheep in the pasture if we don't put a fence around it? Those fences are for the rules. You have to have rules. Okay, this is the difference, I said. If the shepherd was with the sheep, then the sheep would follow the shepherd, and he would go here and there and lead them to the pasture, and they were okay as long as they followed the shepherd. But I said, if you take the shepherd away from them, then you have to put fences around them.
I have decided
We decided to follow Jesus, you know, that's what I decided.
We sang the song, I've decided to follow Jesus, so many times.
That became a part of my life, became a part of who we were.
Just following the church rules and regulations did not bring us peace in our life. Reading the scriptures and seeking God, that brought peace in our life.
Watching my parents make this discovery helped my siblings and I in our personal journey with God.
They told us that if we left the Amish, our children would all leave the faith.
Because there would be no rules there anymore for them to hold them together. We would lose our children, and they would all get ungodly partners to marry because there were if they didn't marry Amish, what was life?
The things that we were told would happen if we left the Amish didn't happen. God's faithful. Today our children are all serving the Lord. Some of them are married. We have some wonderful grandchildren.
Behind me, the cross before me, the world behind me, the cross before me, the world behind me, the cross before me, no turning back, no turning back.
This has been my parents' story, but they're not alone. Join us next time for some more stories, including one with heartbreak and romance.